Hello, everyone. I am Rishita. And so this presentation was influenced by my journey post the pandemic, where I went into this rabbit hole of looking into solo traveling. Um, I said this to a couple of friends, and before you know it, Instagram and YouTube were happy to comply to my needs by showing me content by domestic travel influencers. But as but as soon as I started watching their videos and vlogs about their favorite destinations and just their favorite trips, I started seeing these larger trends of how they constructed and morphed the tourist gaze of a domestic viewer such as myself. And by doing so, perpetuating a very specific idea of not only these tourist sites, but also just the idea of India as a whole. But before doing so, diving into it, I wanted to talk about, let's dive a little bit about the travel influencer industry. So, travel influencers are one of the subcategories of social media influencers. They are integral in shaping viewers' travel aspirations and destination choices. One of the ways they monetize their venture is by building a robust following and using that to then entering collaborations with travel agencies, tour operators to endorse certain brands. They also do conduct affiliate marketing and also promote their merchandise and paid travel courses. India boasts India boasts a booming industry of these travel influencers with popular names amassing millions of followers. This paper specifically focuses on domestic Indian creators looking at domestic destinations for domestic audiences. I will be specifically looking at both Instagram and YouTube to look at what these spatial representations depict, but also importantly, what they leave out. So, firstly, these travel influencers, um, there is an asymmetrical power relation that exists between these influencers and the people that they reflect in their videos. This is both in terms of economic capital, since they have the means to go to these exotic novel locations, have the money to stay in these places, live in certain kinds of accommodations, but also just cultural capital in the sense that they have the technical know how to create these visually stunning videos along with editing and navigating the social media space as well. But what was interesting about the kind of videos that I kept stumbling upon and the larger trend was that they described their journeys as one of real, authentic travelers rather than of just a mere tourist. And by doing so, they tapped on the middle class aspiration to distinguish themselves from lower classes by having distinct experiences. And this phenomenon is a very postmodernist idea. However, John Urey, in his seminal work called Tourist Gaze, argues that this idea of authentic travelers is a myth. So, tourism as an industry works on difference, where an individual temporarily seeks pursuits outside of where they work in these new locations. They then go to these new locations, and their gaze is directed towards new landscapes and exotic spectacles. They then capture this gaze through mobile phones, through videos, and then distribute it on platforms such as social media. Um, however, However, for a region to be constituted as tourist worthy, it needs to be constituted as worth visiting. And who does this authorization? This is where travel professionals come in. They construct certain stereotypes and expectations about the places and people that tourists visit. And by suggesting very specific destinations and activities, these professionals can help shape tourist perceptions of what is worth doing and seeing in these particular destinations. And by doing so, they inculcate these very socially influenced ways of seeing. So, and so tourism then becomes just a collection of sites. So when you look at Eiffel Tower, for instance, you're not just looking at the landscape. You look at the Eiffel Tower as embodying a haven for romance. Similarly, when you look at the pyramids, you don't look at it as a landscape in of itself, but as representing an ancient civilization. So, what domestic travel social media influencers do is they employ the nation the idea of real and raw India, authentic India, that is, to define what should be the new tourist gaze. And by doing so, they frame what is this real India, and with it, a very certain brand of nationalism. For my paper, I will be using Anderson's conceptions of imagined communities. And while he argues that print capitalism can be a great means of forging nationalism, certain political scholars have showed that the cyberspace can also be used to do so. And this is where travel influencers come in. So, talking about how do they do this? How do they conduct this idea of the nation? So first, by their videos, they offer a glimpse of unseen and real India that exists firstly outside of where the urban viewer resides. This means they need to travel, they need to dislocate. And secondly, it's not just available anywhere. It only exists in either a like remote parts of the country, such as towns or villages. So it's not at this very famous popular commercial site. It's actually 70 kilometers away from it. That's where you see the real India. Or narratives of just neglected peripheral regions, such as the Northeast. And lastly, they frame these people as exotic, but ultimately Indians. They're all poor but very, very happy, and they live with no conflict. This is a narrative that's peddled by these social media influencers. So, just diving in a little bit deep. So, this idea of real and raw culture through villages is interesting because their lack of modernity can affords them the point of difference that travel influencers can latch on. But like these places are not just selected innocently. Again, places which have visually splendid, visually splendid landscapes. These are specifically curated, while anything that's less than aesthetic or actual depictions of how most people live in these areas are usually just not captured in the frame. So things like
Rishita,
derelict roads.
you're 7 minutes in, you have 3 minutes to go.
So usually derelict roads, polluted water, all of these things are missed out. Um, Again, this idea is captured by frameworks by titles such as Heart of Nation, Unseen, Untouched Corner, Hidden Gem, and nobody knows about them. Lastly, they construct these shots by capturing thumbnails of the exotic other. So they tap onto the differences in customs and festivities to attract viewers. This is interesting because a Western tourist would also do something along this. They would think of a woman in a regional attire carrying pots of water. This is what domestic travel influencers do as well. But the more the travel influencer interacts with these people, suddenly similarities are highlighted between the two. So, people in the Northeast, yes, they wear different clothes and they might speak different languages, but they also eat Maggie. They also play cricket, just like in the mainland. If you, as an individual, makes the effort, they're not that different because we are all ultimately Indians. And this is the narrative that goes. But by doing so, these travel influencers very superficially engage with the representations of their cultures. All the same, it's a very reductive notion of what they stand for. Also, it's a very nationalist framing because it reduces any sort of differences between the two cultures, and also at the same time it ignores any of like the especially northeast regions of like neglect by the Indian mainland and the separatist movement. So this idea of conflict is completely erased. Um, for instance, Monkey Magic in one of his videos talks about how Nagaland is our country's raw and untouched beauty, where you'll fall easily in love with the state and its people. And lastly, these videos depict little unsuspected paradise where all is peace, rusticity, and happy poverty. Everyone's happy, everyone's unidimensionally kind. Their kindness and generosity of locals, again, is an epistemic framework because it misses out the fact that there are economic transactions that are placed behind the camera, and also any sort of rude encounters are just simply edited out. So, conclusion, travel influencers peddle a narrative to domestic viewers such as us, myself, that we don't know real India. It's elsewhere, it's exotic, it's undiscovered. However, if you make the effort, you too will realize that people are not that different regardless of geographical locations. And therefore, viewers formulate a conception of these spatial sites in particular, but also just India in general via these representations produced by SMIs. Thank you.